Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we continue our look at werewolf movies with the Universal remake of the Lon Chaney Jr. classic The Wolfman, this time starring Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson. And I'm sorry I have a cold. Writer of the current Ben 10 comic series from IDW. I think issue 2 comes out next week. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man, now from Monsterverse Comics, and a contributing writer to Rockabilly Online and Monsterverse's Tales from the Grave anthology series. Say hello, Drew.
Howdy.
Hey. And also in Denver with color commentary, host of the mom-oriented podcast, Pod Mom's dangerous attorney, Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Really? Hello.
It was the only word that came to mind after Pod Moms. Okay. The Wolfman, so saith Wikipedia, is a 2010 American remake of the 1941 classic werewolf horror film of the same name, although it was spelled slightly differently. Drew, can you tell us the difference between the two titles?
Well, the original there is a space in between Wolf and Man, and this, it is all one word. I'm assuming for copyright purposes, that's me guessing. I don't know actually what's the
I really have
story
a
behind
foggy notion. But yes,
yeah.
The answer is as simple as that. There is a space in the original title, The Wolf Man, making two words, and now it's The Wolfman, like he's your attorney.
Phil Wolfman.
Yeah. I'm going to call up Phil Wolfman. He'll take care of me. All right. The film's second half was significantly altered and expanded from the original film's plot. We're going to find out about that if Drew can tell us about it. Directed by Joe Johnston, the film stars Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, and Hugo Weaving, who's fantastic. It was released in U.S. February 12, 2010. It says here, while receiving mostly mixed critical reviews and failing to make back its budget at the box office, it did win an Academy Award for Best Makeup. So this is an Oscar-winning film. So, The Wolfman, and this is where we, for now, wrap up our werewolf saga. So, I'm dying to know. Let's go, Drew, Julia, Jason. Drew, you've had a chance to come back and look at a number of werewolf pictures, and so before we wrap up the whole thing, give me your feeling about this being the last one and your first impressions of The Wolfman.
Well, as far as this tying into the other movie, I really do feel like The Wolfman, the original, the Curse of the Werewolf, and this all do tie in very nicely because they are all basically riffs on the character of Wolfman. I mean, Curse of the Werewolf is a different character, but in name, but he is definitely the same breed of a werewolf that we see in both versions of the Wolfman.
Sort of regretful and
yes, it's definitely the mournful man beast archetype. Now, as far as me being able to be too objective about this movie, now I'm going to say this beforehand. I have a certain sentimental attachment to this movie because this is the movie that my wife and I got engaged at. That we got engaged at the Oscar premiere of this.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, so there is that aspect of it. However, I do like this movie. I know I will acknowledge it is not flawless. I know it had an incredibly troubled production, but there's a lot of cool things about this movie. And I've often said I really do feel like this is a movie that was almost made just for me. The vaunted Drew Edwards buck that Universal is basically saying, "Hey, Drew, come in, see this movie." But it does have a certain cheese factor, I will say, but I still like it.
That's and that can be wonderful. A lot of times there will be a picture that everybody hates, but you yourself, you're like, I can't explain it, but this hits everything that I want. It is. This
is my Dark Shadows.
Right, exactly. Speaking of something that's hard to explain to everybody. Yes, wonderful. Okay, Julia, what are your first impressions? And by the way, Drew, you mentioned the production problems, and I want to get into that a little bit in our first topic but because I don't know much about that. Julia, first impressions, Wolfman.
Well, this movie may have been made for Drew, but it was cast for me because it's Benicio del Toro, whom I just adore, and Anthony Hopkins, who I have great respect for. So I'm kind of indifferent toward Emily Blunt, but she's okay. But I love Benicio, especially in a role like this, because what I like about him so much is that he just seems so very complicated. You know, like you just look at him and you're like, what is going on in his mind? And in this film especially, there's that, you know, tortured like soul thing going, and he just always seems so sad and dark. I just love that. I love that. It's very great. It's a wonderful.
He's actually a huge collector of Universal Monsters memorabilia, and he was, you know, a big driving force behind him and Rick Baker. As far as I know, I mean, I'm not an expert on the production of this movie the way I am on some of the old Universal Monsters, but they were, as far as I know, they were both big driving forces as far as getting this.
Well, yeah, it said in the IMDb that he was attached to it from the second they started talking about doing a remake. And then Anthony Hopkins too. It's like this is his second remake. It's because he was in, I guess, Dracula.
That's right. That's right. The revival stuff.
But the only thing I didn't like is I don't like the violence of it, and I guess that's part of the director's cut, that they made it more violent in the director's cut than it was originally, from what I understand. But I just thought the gore, well, not even the violence, the gore, you know, the fact that there's just so much blood, it's just so gross. I don't like gore. I'm a big fan of off-screen violence. So that was my one thing that I was kind of like, oh, really? But, you know, it's a fun picture, to use Adam's word.
I'm all for calling movies pictures. I don't know why. It just works for me. I think it's because that's what Jack Palance used to, and I always thought it was so charming.
Yeah, no, I love picture.
I'm selling my new picture.
I said it before I realized I was saying it, and then I was like, oh, I'm using Adam's language.
No, I like it because it makes it sound, in a sense, it has an ironic tone. It makes it sound like a product, you know, that you're moving. I don't know. It's just, but and it is a motion picture. But okay, my first impressions of this, it breaks my heart that it didn't do very well, because I actually really like this movie. You know, I don't know for sure if I sat down to try to outline a remake of The Wolfman, I probably would be more slavish to the original than this movie is. Having said that, I don't have any really big problems with it, and you know, I think it gets way too complicated. I think there's too much plot. It's way too intricate. They spend a lot of time going a lot of places that aren't quite necessary, considering the original movie is a quite simple film that's barely, you know, like 75 minutes long. And there's no proof, among everything we've talked about so far, that the extra time spent in this movie actually ends up inuring to the benefit of the movie. So there's no particular reason to make the movie more complicated. Having said that, I like this movie. I like Benicio del Toro. I'm embarrassed by the level of violence. I kind of feel like it, and Drew, you will totally disagree with me on this. In my estimate, the level of violence in The Wolfman brings it brings the seriousness of the movie down, you know, because but I feel that way.
I don't think it brings the level of seriousness down. I do think that is from a school that is not Universal. I feel like the fact that it's so gory kind of ventures more into Hammer horror territory.
That's really possible. I mean, you think like we watched the Universal 1970, and we're going to go right into tone now. We watched the 1979 Universal revamp of Dracula, right? And it's funny because I guess the next cycle was the 98 Dracula, but that one had some big gore, you know, where Dracula ripped out that guy's throat. You know, so there were some like close-up 80s style gore effects in that Dracula. But generally speaking, we don't see that much of it. In this movie, there's some real gore. And yes, you're right. Here's the question about the gore, and then you can start talking about the tone. If Hammer in the 60s could have done the kind of bites and stuff, and like, you know, somebody chomping off somebody's shoulder or whatever, would they have gone this far? In other words,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Come on, that's not even a question. Hammer made exploitation films.
Well, that's true. Okay, so
this is the studio that made the Vampire Lovers.
No, I agree, but I think you're right, except for that it gets a little bit complicated because there's a lot of stuff happening off screen with Hammer, but maybe that's just because of the censors. And, it's maybe if they're like, oh, if we could take a chunk out of that guy's neck and have it spurt blood, if we had hydraulics in the movies in the 60s, we would do that. I mean, I guess
Hammer invented practically. I'm not going to say they invented it because Herschel Gordon Lewis certainly deserves it, but Hammer really made gory horror films mainstream.
Right.
Let's not beat around the bush.
No, but see, there's where we'll disagree though, because if you look at Herschel Gordon Lewis, if you look at like 2000 Maniacs, the crap that Lewis is doing is light years ahead of anything that Hammer does.
You're right. That's why I said mainstream.
Yeah,
mainstream. And Herschel Gordon Lewis didn't have anybody like Rick Baker. Like the other thing about the gore in this movie, like that's if you have somebody like Rick Baker working on your movie, you're gonna have to have some cool gore.
But I thought Lewis's effects are really great. If I understand what you're saying correctly,
Lewis's effects are amusing to me.
Right, but I mean they're gross. They gross you out. So like the tongue trick from I think that's in 2000 Maniacs, where a guy rips out somebody's tongue, and it's done by ripping literally a beef tongue that somebody's holding in their mouth. So you open up the mouth, and the guy
Okay, I get the idea. Mm-hmm.
Well, the point is, that's an amazing effect. And if you pour in like lots of Karo syrup and stuff, then you get this amazing effect of somebody losing their tongue. That would never happen in a Hammer movie ever. That would.
You're right. You're right. It didn't. But I'm saying if they could have gotten away with it, they would have.
You're probably right.
The Hammer was very much about let's sell the shock. But
yeah, there's nothing that James Carreras would not have done if he knew that he could get away with it.
Now, as far as this movie goes, like the difference between this and Herschel Gordon Lewis is Rick Baker and the team that he works with. Those are artists, all right. And whether or not you like gore or even monster effects, that is a group of like very, very talented individuals. And
absolutely, no doubt about it. These are amazing effects. They are truly, truly amazing effects. I just found myself distracted by it. But we've jumped deep into where we wanted to start with this question of the tone of this picture.
Well, and I want to say, as far as tone goes, that I think the setting is so beautiful, like all the England, because it's all filmed in England. And they just have that wonderful, just constant mistiness.
Yes.
Which I don't know how much of that is really England and how much of it is artificially, just.
I have no clear understanding of the set.
Cool and spooky and beautiful. I love that about the tone, and then I like the I don't know if this counts as tone, but I love that all of a sudden you go from kind of traditional, werewolf horror movie to what I like to call mind F movies, because it's like, because you got the dream sequence, and it's just like so crazy when Benicio's kind of going nuts, and they've got him, they've been torturing him and all that, and they've got him drugged.
Yes.
And he just has this crazy, just fantasy sequence, and then when he's remembering being a boy, and there's just all these different things that just kind of take you out of the picture and
Well, to recap the 1941 version, we come into this movie, and it's a fairly, we talked about it just a couple weeks ago, so guys can go and listen to our thing. But Larry Talbot is the heir to this great house in England, and he's come home, and it's not really clear what he's been doing, but it's no great mystery. In other words, nobody treats Larry's career as though it's a mystery. It's just not interesting enough for them to spend much time on. And he seems to have been doing something with like technology in Los Angeles, and now he's come back to hang out and become the manor, the Lord of the Manor. And in this movie, same situation. He's returned after the death of his brother, except for in this movie, the death of the brother really kicks off the plot. And
the death of the brother in the original, I will have to say, it's sort of after a certain point becomes it's not particularly important other than a device to get Lawrence Talbot back home. Like
that's
this
exactly
is
right.
big.
It's
a big plot point here.
Yeah, but that's what's interesting is a lot of the pieces of the original movie are in this movie here, but they've all been sort of tied together, which one could admire. You know, you could point out that you know you could imagine that you know somebody worked really hard to take all the pieces that are in the original picture and sort of intricately tie them together so that it's all part of the same plot. So that, for instance, the girl that Larry goes after, well, Larry ends up getting involved with, in the original is just this girl from town that he meets, and the question is just, will she find him charming or not? You know, will she get over the fact that she already has, in theory, a fiancé, you know, that she's going to toss over for Larry? All that stuff. In this one, she's also, the girl is connected to the plot.
Well, she's the fiancé of his brother.
Of the dead brother.
Yeah,
yes.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about sets. We talked a little bit about and I know we're going to get into Larry and more, but Drew, you were saying though that tonally, and I think by that you mean, I guess the sense of humor of the picture. You felt it was uneven?
It kind of veers wildly at times, and it's actually one of the few things that I don't like about it. It goes between kind of having this very tongue-in-cheek quality, but then it's also relentlessly grim at times. Yeah. And some scenes that works, and some scenes it doesn't. But there's some. Like I really do feel like a lot of the extras in this movie really got what kind of movie they were in, but maybe some of the other actors with maybe more than a few lines, they didn't realize what kind of movie they were making it, so they played it very. I mean, there should be a certain degree of decorum for this kind of story, even though it's fanciful, but have a little bit of fun with it. It's still a universal monster movie.
Yes.
There is a tradition that goes along with that.
Well, and you think of like all those Universal pictures we've watched, when we see the working class guys in the bar, they're always more or less comic relief. Their accents are just like extremely broad. And
they do have that here. And I wish honestly that was. As a fan of those movies, I wish that was more the tone that was carried over throughout the entire movie. But then there's like I don't know, like for example, the guy that plays Dr. Lloyd, to me, is like the big offender in this, is that he seems like he's in some period medical drama. Like he just the way that actor comes off, and I'm like to me the best sort of side actors in this entire movie that really carry the tone that I would want for the entire movie is the guy playing the priest, who is priceless. Yes. I don't know what he does in town, but he looks like he should be the burgomaster of the village of Frankenstein, but the guy with the giant mustache. That guy is great.
Yes. No, that's right. Well,
who's the other one? Wait, who's the other one? You said there were two.
The priest. The guy with the mustache and the priest. Yes. The power of Satan to turn men into beasts. It's like that stuff is great.
Oh, okay.
I love all that stuff.
You're saying that you would like more of the classic monster movie tone. Less. It needs to be more melodramatic and less self-consciously modern.
Well, I mean, I think it would have done better. I think people want there to be by having the gore and the modern effects and the CG effects and all that other stuff, you're catering enough to the modern audience. But I think people, when they see the problem Universal has really had with really getting what the tone right for every time they try to reboot the Universal monsters. If they have something like Van Helsing, which goes way too far into being campy, and then they have this, which at times goes way too far into being too serious. And I think if they would just look at what people loved about the originals and people continue to love decades after those movies.
That's a really good point. I mean, when you think for one thing, the motivations of the original Universal horror were understandable to all ages, so that children understood the anguish of the monster, and so did adults, and adults understood the guilt of Dr. Frankenstein. Whereas, what's going on in this movie? In this movie, there's Larry is an actor, and being an actor is an embarrassing profession, and also, he was freaked out by the death of his mom, and he was subjected to shock therapy, and so he's got issues with that because he feels like his dad should have come and got him out of the hospital instead of locking him away. And none of this is like the kind of universal, no pun intended, but the sort of universal anguish that is brought. It's like it's almost like too clever by half, if I may. But again, I don't want to suggest that it's a failure. I'm just saying that
none of this is said with any malice intent to this movie. As I said, because everybody and their brother and their sister and their uncle and their aunt and their grandparents hated this movie, and I was.
I don't understand that.
You know what? This is all right. This is an all right horror.
This movie is not worth hating. I mean, there are far more hateable movies. I like this movie a lot better than Star Trek Into Darkness. I mean, there's a lot of things that I will watch, or that I would watch this before an awful lot of very popular films.
And this is a very respectful remake. You can tell most of the parties involved like the original movie.
Well, and it's fun. To me, it's such a fun psychological drama because you got all the stuff with it. Because if we can, get into the plot a little bit. Yeah. The deal is that the dad, Anthony Hopkins' character, Benicio's father, is actually a werewolf, and he's been a werewolf ever since he was infected by a boy in a cave or something. And,
okay, is that well? Complete your thought, and then I wanted Drew to comment. Tell me if that comes from where I think it comes from.
No, you can go ahead.
Well, my question is: are we looking at a teeny tiny little remake of the Werewolf of London in the middle of the Wolfman?
I think so. I mean, I think that there's homages to a lot of different werewolf movies, not just the Wolfman in this. I mean, even the rampage sequence in London seems evocative of the same thing that we saw a while back in American Werewolf in London.
Right. Well, it also reminded me a lot of Curse of the Werewolf. When he's jumping around on the rooftops. Werewolf in London stayed at surface level the whole time, and it was very exciting that way because he's just like smashing stuff. There's that whole sequence in this movie where they combine the chase from Curse of the Werewolf with the chase from Werewolf in London.
Well, and I like the effect of the werewolf being able to run both as a human on 2 feet, and then also suddenly he starts running like a wolf. I think that's pretty cool when he's like running across the rooftop.
This really benefits, I think, unlike a lot of updates, this really benefited from modern, because the werewolf in this movie seems really powerful in a way that we.
Let's talk about that for a second. Yeah, I love this werewolf. I thought
he won an Oscar for the makeup. We talked about that.
Well, I mean, he looks like the Wolfman. So he's got a human. He's got humanoid sort of legs. He's got a shirt. He's got pants. Yeah. He's a Wolfman. He's not a proper werewolf like the American Werewolf of London, which is just a giant wolf. This is a Larry Talbot Wolfman. He just looks more awesome, and that's cool. I completely enjoyed seeing that. I thought it was one of my favorite Wolfmans ever.
This is my favorite movie werewolf. Like, this knocked down a lot of werewolves, and he's so cool looking. Yeah.
It reminds me somewhat of the Wolfman design in Dracula, the 1992 one. And that might have been Rick Baker as well. I don't know.
That was Jeez, who is it? I can't remember his name, but it's actually the same guy that did the makeup effects in Van Helsing and Lost Boys, but I can't remember his name right now.
Well, anyway, although I didn't like the werewolf in Van Helsing per se, but I did like the one here. And what I was saying about Werewolf in London is in that particular movie, Henry Hall becomes a werewolf because he goes up into Tibet searching for, I can't remember, a certain flower or something. It doesn't matter. He goes up into the mountains and gets bitten by a werewolf and then comes back to London. And that's precisely what occurs here. And it was really neat because it was like the writers were like, hey, let's find a backstory for Anthony Hopkins, and well, what if we make him Henry Hall from The Werewolf of London? Nobody will ever get that. Those that do will think it's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And that's all great, and I'm glad that they do that kind of stuff. Except that, again, it makes the plot somewhat complicated, because
if you want to talk about needless complications, in earlier drafts of this, they were trying to update the idea from the original draft of the original Wolfman, where Larry Talbot wasn't going to be an actual werewolf at all. He was going to be a homicidal maniac who thought he was a werewolf.
So that gets back to the psychological drama then, because what I was saying about that was that here, you got the dad who turns out to have killed his mother. So his mother was killed when he was younger, but he thought she had committed suicide. But now he realizes, in the light of all this, that his father was actually a werewolf and killed the mother, which I'm still unclear about because the mother wasn't ripped up; she was cut. So I don't understand, why did the werewolf kill her so neatly?
I think his memory is all effed up with him.
Well, that's why I'm saying it's psychological drama, because that's the thing. It's the whole. You never know what's going on in the whole film, what's real and what's just his brain, and kind of playing tricks on him. And then so he's got the issues with his dad, killing his mom and being this crazy monster, and you've got the fact that he was in an asylum as a kid after his mom was killed, and then now he's back there because they think that he is just a homicidal maniac. They think that he thinks he's a werewolf, but the doctor parades him in front of all his colleagues to show that look what's going to happen when the full moon happens and he doesn't become a werewolf, and he does become a werewolf. Yes. And he kills the hell out of everybody. It was really funny.
Fantastic sequence.
I would say I think that is actually the signature scene of this entire movie. If there was a reason for this movie to exist, it's that scene.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
That is horror movie logic defined. We always talk about horror movie logic, and every other in reality, they would parade him around, but he would not turn into a werewolf.
Right.
And horror movie logic, he's going to. And I love the fact how the Wolfman eats just about everybody else he comes across.
Yeah.
But he takes that shrink and he tosses him out the window. He's just still enough of Larry Talbot to be angry at that dude.
Yeah.
Well,
and then you got Hugo Weaving kind of hanging around. I loved Hugo Weaving's character. It's very interesting. Every once in a while you get a glimpse of, Mr. Anderson kind of coming out of it, but for the most part it's really great.
Well, Hugo Weaving, he shows up early on because Larry is quite brave. We meet Larry early on. His brother's been killed. He comes back to Blackmore. He's trying to blend in. He's trying to make nice with his brother's fiancée and with his dad. And when there is this monster about, Larry is quite brave in trying to confront it when it's going crazy at the camp, and that's when he gets bit. But it's I've lost what question I was answering because I was actually looking things up so somebody save me.
Larry's quite brave.
Yeah. You started about how brave Larry was.
Is a lot. This Larry is a little bit more dynamic.
Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
Well, this Larry is a little bit more dynamic in that respect versus the Lawrence Talbot, who's more of a average Joe type character.
Well, the Lon Chaney version of Larry Talbot. But I mean, okay, the thing is, we're talking about London and Hugo Weaving. So Hugo is, becomes basically, there is that character that's in the original movie. All these things have versions in the original. Hugo's really interesting, and he pursues him to London, and all the London stuff is really interesting. And yet even though that's the best scene in the whole movie, I really wish it weren't here. I kind of wish this had been a closer remake, because I kind of feel like somehow, even though there is so much stuff for me to feel sorry for Benicio del Toro about in this movie, where he was tortured, his mom was killed, he saw her body, he's subverted all that stuff.
His dad killed his brother now.
Yeah, all this crap, and yet somehow I felt a lot sorrier for Lon Chaney Jr., about whom I knew nothing.
Well, I mean, that's the acting, because the thing is, Lon Chaney Jr. seems very pitiful and pathetic to me, whereas Benicio del Toro seems tortured. So there's different kinds of sympathy that you have. It's Lon Chaney, it's almost like a child, whereas Benicio, it's like, like a serial killer. I mean, it's like you're kind of like, this guy is clearly has some horrible things going on in his mind, but you got to be afraid of him because there's no controlling him. He's crazy. Yep. Whereas Lon Chaney, you're kind of like, oh, I feel like if only I could, like hold his hand, he'd be okay.
I think the other thing is the difference in the way Lawrence Talbot is in the original, like. You can imagine that under better circumstances, Lawrence Talbot would have had a perfectly normal, happy life. And, you get the sense that that's been taken away with it.
If he doesn't
Larry
get bit by Bela Lugosi
here seems, the Larry Talbot here seems doomed from panel one. Like the moment you see him, before he's even bitten by the other werewolf, he seems doomed.
That's really well said. I think you nailed it exactly right. The most tragic thing about the 1941 Wolfman is that you really get the impression that things could go great for Larry. If he doesn't get bit by Bela Lugosi, everything is going to sail. It's going to be fine. With this guy, you're exactly right. He's a kind of a screwed up actor, and he's got a lot of anger. And actually now we should talk a little bit about Anthony Hopkins. The source of most of his anger, we talked about Anthony, that he became a werewolf by, going to Tibet and everything.
Or to India in this case, yeah.
He's, it's an interestingly expanded role from the one that was in the original Wolfman. Because in the original, he's just an English gentleman. In this case, he's an English gentleman, but he also, he was an adventurer. When he went to India, he brought back a manservant who knows all sorts of like neat.
He's a boxer.
Yeah, right. He's a big burly boxer dude. You get the impression that he's maybe physically stronger than Benicio del Toro, even if he weren't a werewolf. He's cruel. All of that's, and this is Anthony Hopkins doing it. So that's great, and it's expert.
Well, and he seems to have become unleashed, or unhinged, because for the longest time he's had his manservant lock him up at night, but now he's kind of gotten drunk with power, and he's like, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. You're right. When by the final act,
eating gypsies is groovy. I mean, come on, you wouldn't want to do that.
Well, no, he starts making speeches towards the end that sounds like true megalomaniacs from everywhere from 60s James Bond movies, Hammer films, whatever, because he's like, I was locking myself up, but now I realize one must let the wolf out, and he's basically talking master race crap now.
Right.
And when
he's also saying bring on the fight between us.
Exactly.
So when they both turn into wolves and have this badass wolf fight. I will say I like that story, that whole relationship so much more. I think it's so much more interesting than the love story. I didn't buy in this movie. I didn't buy him with Gwen. I didn't buy that they were in love really, or that even she needed to be there. Like I kind of feel like
I don't know. I don't really understand why it's there at all.
I don't. Well, it's there to kind of pay homage to the original, but I don't think it's needed.
This movie is an hour and 40 minutes long. Yeah, go ahead.
I think. I think the difference between the Sir John here and the Sir John in the 40s version is our relationship with authority is different than back in the 40s. Obviously, the father figure representing authority, and in the 40s, the authority was good. Now we're not quite on such good footing about that.
That's interesting. It's interesting that you would say that. That we get an evil Sir John because we now are in a universe where Sir John almost has to be evil, or there's something radical.
Well, horror movies always sort of mirror the id of their time, the social consciousness of their time, and I think for over a decade now, we've been a little bit more contemptuous of our government than we once were, and that's filtering into pop culture in interesting ways. And I like the relationship in the original. I think I wouldn't touch it in that, but I find the father-son relationship in this to be very interesting too. And yes, a departure from the original, but I don't need a frame-for-frame remake. I have the original Wolfman. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. If I want to watch that, I'll watch that.
Well, that's a good point, and it may be that I'm making an argument that doesn't make any sense. Because if what I'm saying is, if Jason's just saying, hey, just take the old script and put Benicio del Toro in it, that surely isn't a satisfactory thing. I mean, we would
the original, the 79 Dracula is almost nothing like the Bela Lugosi one, and I like both of those films too. I mean, this to me is sort of the werewolf equivalent of the 79 Dracula.
Well, and it suffered. I think it maybe suffers a similar fate, because I believe that 79 Dracula did probably better in its initial release, the first few months, but it has completely fallen out of favor. It's not like people don't like it anymore. It's literally people have forgotten that it exists, and it just sank like a stone. And I don't know what's going to go down with this Wolfman, because this was a really big Wolfman. Now, you said that you've read recently about a new Universal Wolfman
TV show.
Yeah, because of, I guess, the Dracula TV show, sort of reinvigorating interest in the Universal monsters. And I haven't seen that show. I don't know whether it's any good or not.
I feel embarrassed that I haven't watched any of it, but
I've heard mixed things. Like, some people seem to really like it, and some people seem to think it's terrible. I'm going to wait till DVD. But they're doing a Wolfman TV show, and honestly, the Wolfman's a better character for television than Dracula is, because you don't have to make when you make Dracula the protagonist of anything, you have to kind of mangle the character. Right. That's not who Dracula. That's not what the character of Dracula is designed to be. But the Wolfman, you have, the beauty of the Wolfman is that the antagonist and the protagonist are the same character, and you can sort of follow the formula of the Wolfman and kind of tie that into the formula of the old Incredible Hulk TV show.
Absolutely.
And it would do that very nicely.
There's a bunch of things you could do. You could do that. You could do. Basically, you could just have them being alter egos in ongoing, any kind of procedural you wanted. There's a million ways that you could do it. I have to say that visually, I would be very happy. They're not going to do this, because I just have a feeling, because I'm saying it out loud, I have a feeling that there's no way it will manifest itself. But I liked the look of the 1940s in the original movie. It was a contemporary Wolfman, so they're wearing 1940s clothes, and the 1940s clothes look so cool and so exotic compared with Victorian clothing and Edwardian clothing, which I feel like, even though I love Victorian stuff, I feel like I've seen that stuff to death. Now that we've had so many Sherlock Holmes and so many, everything. Whereas if they had Benicio del Toro wearing khaki pants and, driving a late 30s Roadster, that would have been so cool. I really would have loved to have seen that. So I hope they consider going back to their original time period. There's no reason for this picture to be Victorian, although
I think people associate Gothic horror with Victorian, and I think that's why that this is Victorian. And honestly, I mean, I don't associate the Victorian look with Universal. I associate that with Hammer. And I feel like that this movie does have a long
very good point.
strain of Hammer DNA in it. Not you know, that I.
No, you're exactly right. Universal was always quite happy to make their horrors contemporary and to put them in the 30s and 40s, and that was where they were. And so they weren't meant to look old. They were meant to look fresh and new. And Hammer was the newer, fresher, and they put theirs back in the 1890s. I think because they liked the costumes, honestly.
I think there's also a fetishization of clothing in the Hammer movies, particularly with the female actresses. But that's another topic for another time.
That's absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't have the big Hammer glamour calendars for nothing. You know,
I have a whole book on Hammer glamour. I'll have to let you borrow it sometime if you're ever in Texas.
Yep. No, so I'm dying to see what Universal's going to do with that. But we talked about Larry's character, you know, whereas he was before kind of a schlub who everything might go right, but instead it goes horribly wrong. In other words, he's a character who would be, you know, in the 40s version, he's a character who would be at home in like a boxing picture or something. Just some poor schmo that bad things keep happening to. We talked about, you know, and in the new one, of course, he's a completely neurotic, kind of cool, sexually charged actor type. And then Sir John has gone from being the genteel, slightly foppish Lord of the Manor to this sort of bring him back alive hunter guy, played by Anthony Hopkins. Fine. And then we talked about the girl. And really, those are the three most important characters. But I think the thing that really distinguishes other than the violence, what distinguishes it is just the intricacies of this plot. That the original movie is just about an hour long. I may be wrong in that. It might be as long as 70 minutes long, but in this movie is quite long, and it's because it takes us. We go all the way to London. You know, we have that, and we talked about all those scenes in London are great, but I don't know. Let me phrase the question this way. You guys were saying, hey, Jason, it doesn't make sense if they just do a Gus Van Sant shot-for-shot remake of the original Wolfman, and I agree with that. But at the same time, don't you feel like there's this tendency for remake movies to get sort of bigger and fatter and needlessly complicated?
Well, yeah, but I don't actually think this is one of them.
So you're actually perfectly happy with how
I don't mind the alter. I really don't, because I don't need to see the original Wolfman with different actors. Like that's
no, I agree.
That's silly.
But going to London, I think particularly what annoyance is not the word. It's more like a sinking feeling that we're off track. I feel like this movie shouldn't go to London. You know, I just feel like it's a mistake for it to take this.
You would like it all to be in the town with the superstitious villagers and the gypsies and
right.
You know, if there's one thing I would change about it is I wish there was more Mileva. That's really it. Like Mileva is cool in this as she's cool in the original, and I wish there was more of her in this.
Yeah, but then again, I mean, the part where she does what she is in is because she's kind of useless. Like when Gwen goes to visit her, all she does is say, "Oh gosh, I hope you're going to be willing to kill him when it's time," and that's it. Like there's no gypsy magic thing that she gives her. I was hoping she was going to give her some kind of gypsy magic thing.
Yeah, I guess. I just like that character, and
she's a great character. I'm just saying that particular scene was very disappointing to me because I really thought there was going to be some great. Well, I mean, I don't know what I thought there was going to be, but
there was more
like
for her to do in the original. Remember, she had the son.
Yeah.
The son was the.
That's right. She's a more important character in the original, and you know, it's hard to top Maria Upinskaya, but I think Geraldine Chaplin is very entertaining as Mileva.
No, she is good. She's very enjoyable, and the gypsy camp looks really great. So I guess
the bear looks pretty fake. That's really the CGI bear kind of. That's another thing. I'm like, really, a CGI bear? You couldn't find a Rent-A-Bear somewhere?
Yeah, that did not bother me. You know, I like all the stuff in the gypsy camp. And my God, Blackmore, the the sets of this thing are, whether they're real or whether we're looking at just miles and miles of green screen or whatever, it looks
No, it's all England. Yeah.
Oh, it's fabulous. The house, the grounds they're on, everything is just wondrous to behold. My problem when we go to London is are a couple things that I can tick off really quickly. One, I never believe it. I never really believe that we're in London. I believe that we're in a weird 3D space that is basically trying to remind us of other Victorian stuff like the new Sherlock Holmes pictures. I also, although I guess that doesn't make sense because I guess this is before those, or certainly contemporaneous.
No, it was about a year after.
Oh, okay. So there's that, and so I worry that you had some executive go, hey, can we go to London and see a bunch of people in hansom cabs and stuff, and okay. But I just feel like it's changing the subject, especially considering this movie is, kind of long, and I also, the going to London smacks of somebody being too closely adherent to one of those outline books that I read all the time. I'm totally into outline books. I love them. But there's all kinds of advice, on a certain page in the screenplay, you need to totally change the setting and have all the characters get up and get on a train and go to another place where they continue the plot. I just feel it sort of just clicking in here. Like there's a whole second unit that's probably all in charge of doing all the London work, and and in the end they go back to the house. So I would have been perfectly happy to have the scene in the medical school just be moved to a smaller medical school in the village near Blackmore and avoid all of this Jack the Ripper stuff. Although, since we mentioned Jack the Ripper, you made a really good point, which is that supposedly Hugo Weaving's character is a real character. Is that right?
No, Aberline was a real person, and it is kind of weird that they brought him into weird, not bad weird, but weird nonetheless.
Yeah, it's certainly throwing in more stuff. That's
I don't think if you don't know that, though, I don't think it takes anything away from the movie. I think most people are just going to think, oh, this is just some dude, and, they make an offhand remark about the Ripper case, but they don't. Yeah,
you were involved in it. Right.
But they don't really, if you didn't know that's based on a historical figure, I don't think it would detract from the film at all. Although it is kind of weird because at the end of the movie, he's been bitten, and this historical figure is now a werewolf. Yeah. When you think about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. I agree with you that throwing in fun things like that is really more just, I think it's a fun tip of the hat on the part of Universal to people like you who might know that. And I guess that's totally great. Because I don't think it gets in the way at all. There's no way you could go, wow, I would have enjoyed it more if they hadn't included that. I'm just pointing out that they certainly are cramming this movie full of stuff, So that there is that point about the plot being much more complex, and we're definitely getting up towards the end of the hour. So what else would you guys like to talk about as far as the Wolfman?
We should probably go back to Rick Baker because we really didn't get too knee deep into except that we all agree that the werewolf in this is really awesome looking.
No, please tell us about it.
Well, I do think if there's one thing that is a shame about this is you have this great-looking werewolf, you have great-looking gore effects, and are provided by Rick Baker and his people, but you don't get a transformation sequence. The transformation is all CG, and it's decent-looking CG stuff. Looks a lot like the Incredible Hulk transformations from all the Marvel movies.
Well, I kind of liked that it was almost beside the point. In other words, it's perfect. There's nothing to complain about it, but it almost acknowledges, look, we've all seen lots of amazing stuff where people turn into wolves, so.
But this is Rick Baker. He did the transformation in American Werewolf in London.
Right. He did the greatest one.
Imagine what he could do now. Imagine. That is a crime against humanity that we did not get another werewolf transformation from him.
And I got what that would be. I can't. That's the problem. Is I can't imagine. I don't know what.
Oh,
what more?
But he could. He could.
What more could you do than American Werewolf in London? You could make the prosthetics on his hands and feet look more real, I presume. You know. Now in Van Helsing, they came up with a different concept where the wolf emerges from the skin of the man. So the guy tears his top skin off, and he's a wolfman underneath, and then when it's time to switch, he does the same thing again. So he sheds one into the other. That was novel, you know. And the howling concept is for hair to come out, you know. And I don't remember how the hair worked in American Werewolf. He stretches, he turns into his whole body transforms.
Which is kind of what they do. Here, but I just it's the CGI effects are transformed. Yeah, they're not good enough to where I just can't imagine that they had Rick Baker. They could have done something better. You know, it's just like every time I see that, it's like, man, you know, what a missed opportunity.
I really feel like what happened here is that they were like, you know what? Let's move on to something else because we've all seen transformations.
You know what? That is outright not true because Rick Baker did want to do a transformation sequence.
Well,
they did not have. And again, I'm not an expert on the production of this, but I do believe they didn't do it because they didn't have the budget to do that, and CG was more cost effective. I could be wrong about that, but that is my remembrance of it.
When I say what do I know about this, I mean, I don't know what Baker would envision would be a fantastic.
Exactly.
Because that's what he is, right? And I see your point. You're like, look, you have a genius. Why not let him run? Why not let him do something that will get people talking the way that Jason thinks, oh, I'm never going to be talking about transformation scene again, you know. But you're Rick Baker, and you know that you could make Jason wrong by coming up with something. So
exactly, that is exactly my point. Like they could have done so, and the transformation here is just like a big part of werewolf movies is the transformation scene, and the transformation here is just so ho hum. It's
really literally an afterthought. I mean, it just sort of almost, it just kind of, it's happening and you're just going to skip through it. Not unlike the romance in this movie. I don't know. I almost feel like the problem of this movie is it is too modern in terms of screenplay construction. That there's a giant checklist that these screenwriters went to and they added in stuff until they had their whole checklist filled out. And what you wind up is an overly bloated Hollywood story that doesn't satisfy me nearly as much as the nearly accidental stories that used to be. And I say this as a person who both loves Hollywood stories and loves all those outline books, but I just kind of feel like it's too bad numbers for them. Okay, we should definitely go to final thoughts and then come around to to our endorsements. And if you want, I think it also would be worth, just like we did at the end of the Harryhausen, to talk about your final thoughts with what have you learned watching a number of these werewolf movies together. Because we watched several. We watched American Werewolf London, we watched the original Wolfman, we watched The Curse of the Werewolf, and now we're watching this Wolfman. I know from Drew's perspective, we're just cracking the surface. So what have we learned so far? And also, what are your final thoughts on this? Let's same direction, Drew, Joya, and then I'll wrap up. Probably at a much more abbreviated because we'll probably hit most of the good stuff.
What did I learn? I love werewolf movies. They're just about my favorite subgenre of horror, and I think they're quintessentially they're quite possibly the perfect movie monster. They're so cinematic. But so I don't know that I learned anything new. I just enjoyed watching all these movies, and we barely cracked the surface. We've done kind of all our typical werewolf movies, which is great. But there's The Howling, which is an important werewolf movie.
There's so many that we could. There's feminist werewolf movies, aren't there? There's Ginger Snaps.
Ginger that, Dog Soldiers, which is a great werewolf movie that where the werewolves are not the focal point of the movie. They're the sort of the problem that needs to be dealt with.
I love Dog Soldiers. I love Dog Soldiers a lot. Yeah.
This is a great genre, and I think the reason why it endures is because it does speak to a very basic principle, which is the duality of man. You know, man is this divine creation, or man is this lower animal, and I think that is why the werewolf myth will endure for all time. My final thoughts on this movie, I enjoy this movie. I've enjoyed talking about it with y'all. It's just a fun flick. Is it perfect? No. Like I said, I understand there was a lot of production problems with it. It doesn't show up as much on screen to my eye as it does with plenty of other movies. And there's certainly a lot more movies that deserve to be hated over this one.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very, very much. Julia, what are your final thoughts, both on having watched these 4 werewolf movies and also on this movie? You can take that whichever order you like.
Well, this movie, I would like to see. I would like to see it as, because I keep coming back as I kept coming back to the term psychological drama. I realized that that's all I want it to be. I want it to be a psychological drama and not the gory, violent, werewolf movie, and not the love story. So I kind of feel like I would, in my mind, the ideal version of this film would be just take the stuff with him and with Anthony Hopkins and with the doctor and the insane asylum and Hugo Weaving and all that, and just kind of go crazy with that, and then cut out a lot of the rest of it. Like a lot of the stuff, because I think the gypsy camp thing was handled so well. So I almost would rather see it not as a remake, but as a reinterpretation of the Wolfman, and leave the original alone as far as having, because the first one handled the gypsy thing so well and all that, and I just thought that was just, I kind of got this confused a little bit when I was thinking about it for this call.
Yeah.
I was like, which one's the one that has this, and which one's the one that has, and I almost think that the first Wolfman handled all that so perfectly that it really didn't need to be remade. And
oh my gosh, can you imagine? Oh, Drew, that would be really cool. You could write this. Can you imagine if it were like a series of werewolf stories where it was just about the gypsies? Like let's just say there's one extraordinarily smart, maybe police college educated gypsy who's come home to live among the gypsies because that's where his mom's from, and he's going to help her and also got to do the shopping and some of the cooking. But they're rolling from town to town hunting werewolves as gypsies. So they got to keep like ripping people off and doing things like that. But I would love to see this from their perspective.
Anyway, so that's kind of my take on both of those, is that it's I get them a little confused because so many of the things kind of overlap, and that's fine. That's I guess as it should be, but I'd kind of like to see them be a little bit more like own their own special thing and be a little more different than they are.
Maybe you'll get that in Wolfman Mach 3 with the TV show.
Yeah, maybe. All right. So I have really enjoyed watching these werewolf movies, mainly because I really enjoyed listening to, just like I like to just wax on about Hammer movies at any opportunity. I love how much Drew admires werewolf movies, so it was definitely worth it for that. And it's exactly as you said, there's something unsatisfactory about the fact that we've only hit the classics and like the highest high classics. So we've barely gotten into the stuff that's really interesting to really grapple with, because in many cases I'll gladly watch a flawed semi-classic before watching a classic again, because the cracks are where it can get really interesting. So these are definitely the literate werewolf movies. These are the ones you must watch if you want to have a working vocabulary about werewolf films. But we've only begun. So we're going to have to return.
We've only just begun.
Yes. Zombie. If I do the story, I'm going to work zombie carpenters into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be Karen. Karen has news for us all. So I have loved doing this retrospective, but I also want to go deeper. I want to do, The Beast Must Die and Ginger Snaps and Dog Soldiers.
And I gotta hold out for The Company of Wolves because it's such a weird '80s werewolf
I never
movie.
saw it. I have not seen it.
That is a bizarre movie and totally worth watching.
So there we go. And and I'm sure it's possible that there's even more that just haven't that I'm not even thinking of right now. Oh well, my God, we got to do some of the Paul Naschy Spanish Wolfman pictures because we haven't even started talking about European movies. That I think it would be worth looking at Francois Truffaut's Beauty and the Beast.
Now you're just making stuff up.
No, the makeup actually looks like a wolfman. So, also, I'm going to learn to pronounce the word wolfman. I was actually at an elementary school recently, and they kept asking me if I was saying woof, and I said no, I'm just from Texas. So, and that's how that goes. So I've really enjoyed it. This particular movie, Wolfman, I think is wonderful to look at. It's fantastic. We're absolutely in the same boat that we were with the remake of Dark Shadows, which is that there are weird choices that happen that you wish didn't happen. Having said that, this is a way better movie than that Dark Shadows. That Dark Shadows is really fun, enjoyable, and there's a million things I enjoy about it. But I think this is a pretty good movie. I just kind of feel in the end like it's both more disturbing and more plastic than I want it to be. But not at all bad. So let's do endorsements. I have something really exciting to talk about. I hope you guys too do. Drew, what do you got to endorse for us this week?
I'm going to endorse yet another YouTube video. I stumbled across, and I hope it's still up there because I heard Marvel is actually getting litigious about this, which I think is crummy of them. There was a very, very well-made Marvel Zombies versus Army of Darkness fan film. And if they ever have to recast Ash for the Evil Dead series, I know they're into doing remakes and whatnot now. The guy that plays Ash in this is pitch perfect. The effects, like the makeup effects and everything, are really good. I actually visually like the guy even though he's zombie Wolverine. I really love the guy they have playing Wolverine. Nothing against Hugh Jackman, but this guy's built like how I always imagined Wolverine from the comics being built. And it's just, they do a good job of kind of referencing Sam Raimi's cinematic style. It's a lot of fun to watch. And if it's still up on YouTube, and God, I hope it is, so worth it. So worth it. Marvel, if you really shut these guys down, that's really crummy of you. Like, let fans have fun. It's not like they're making any money off of this. Just let them have fun.
In the past, they've let that stuff just ride. And
I know. I don't understand why this would be the thing that would, maybe because it's a little bit too well made. I don't know. Like that's the thing. I guess it's a really slick looking fan film, but I mean certainly there are plenty of other fan films that are slick looking. So I don't know.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a wonderful endorsement, and I'll totally look for that. By the way, yeah, some of the best Marvel stuff. I saw one yesterday where Professor X fires Jubilee from the X-Men, and that's funny.
Oh, that's a series. They have one with Gambit and Wolverine.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, and none of those are licensed. It's just always just people doing, sometimes with more, sometimes less production values. Julia, do you have any endorsements?
No, I'll let you have my time.
All right. My only endorsement this week is not horror related, but it is definitely pop culture related. The Coen Brothers movie Inside Llewyn Davis comes out next week, and I watched it last night in New York, and it is fantastic. It's a film about the folk. What you'd call the folk revival of the 1960s, which is where this like super popular folk music comes from. Bob Dylan and Peter Paul and Mary and so forth. So folk music goes from being this sort of, farmer agitation music from the 40s and becomes this big social movement, pop-ish music of the early 60s. And the movie is about that period, like right before Bob Dylan is going to hit big. And it follows a folk musician through a really crummy week as he tries to get gigs and he's auditioning and he's getting a lot of bad news. And which makes it sound really depressing. And it does all that, but it's wonderful, and it's got great musical performances. So for instance, Carey Mulligan and Justin Timberlake, who plays a folk musician who has a sort of a promising career, and this other guy, do Peter Paul and Mary's 500 Miles, and they do it wonderfully, and it's just great. There's a lot of like songs that are done in their entirety, like from start to finish in the movie, where the movie just stops and listens to the performer in the story just play an acoustic guitar and sing a song. So it's one of those movies that takes time to give you like 5 or 6 really good performances. So I'm sorry for going on about this, but I just saw this and I'm like really, really excited by this piece of work. So
great.
So yeah, check that out. Also, Ben 10 number 2 comes out next week. So that's the only thing that I would even log roll about. Well, I have been really thankful to do the Werewolf series. Guys, we will be back, I believe, like right after the holidays. We're going to take some time off because it's getting to where we cannot even show up on the phone together. It's impossible because everybody has like 9 things they have to do at a different time, which is completely understandable. So thank you. Like us on Facebook, leave comments, leave questions, tell us that we need to be paying more attention to X or Y, and we will totally at least consider doing it. And
and if we don't get on here before the holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, whatever else you celebrate.
Absolutely.
Happy holidays.
Have a howling New Year.
Happy Friday the 13th.
Happy
yes,
Friday.
it's true.
Yes. All right.
Be safe.
Thanks, everybody, so much. Bye.
Goodbye.
Right.